Well, I know I've mentioned before that I like to try at least to plan my talks out at least a month in advance, and that includes choosing the talk titles, which has its advantages and disadvantages. And one of the disadvantages is that the title doesn't always match exactly what I want to talk about. When things change in the world in the weeks or two leading up to the talk, the title is different from what I want to talk about. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I learned from some very excellent communication teachers in ministerial school is never let a title stand in the way of what you want to talk about. And what I want to talk about today is violence, specifically religiously motivated violence, which has been in the headlines for far too long now. The past couple of months with, you name it, ISIS, Boko Haram, and then the shootings in Paris this last Wednesday kind of brought it all to a head. And first of all, speaking for myself, Je suis Charlie. I am Charlie. There's a lot of those images going around out there, but that one is my favorite, I think, because it shows somebody taking the point of a pencil and sticking it into the barrel and plugging up the barrel of an AK-47, which seems to be the weapon of choice for terrorists. And once again, we're making the affirmation that the pen or the pencil is ultimately mightier than the sword or the AK-47. And I can just tell you that as a lawyer and as a minister, the foundation of my careers has been free speech, free expression, the free and unfettered exchange of ideas, even the ideas that I just might disagree with or perhaps find distasteful or even offensive. And I say, Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie, but we're all Charlie because those are our fundamental freedoms that are under assault and under attack. So today I'm going to start out by exercising the right of free speech, free expression, by voicing an idea that may not be all that popular in our politically correct, relativistic, postmodern culture. Here it is. Islam is not a religion that is built on principles of peace. I'm serious, and I'll say it again. Islam is not a religion of peace. Neither is Christianity. Neither is Judaism. Neither is Mormonism, and just about any other religion you can think of, except for maybe Jainism, which is a totally pacifist religion, and the Buddhists do a pretty good job of it, although you can find some situations where they've resulted to force and violence as well. And I think what happens sometimes when we get into these religious issues of religions of peace is we wind up like, well, Dave was talking about space aliens a little bit earlier. I just happened to come across this cartoon. The space aliens are looking at the Earth and they're saying to each other as the Earth is blowing up, as near as I can tell, they're fighting over which religion is the most peaceful. If they were to come along and tune in to our various broadcasts and monitor things on this planet for a period of time, they might easily come to that conclusion. So the spotlight, unfortunately, the Christianity, Judaism, even Buddhism, they have their problems, but in this day and age, right now, the spotlight is on Islam when it comes to institutionalized violence and terrorism. And there's this old saying, it takes two to tango. And when it comes to violence and religion, there are two elements that have to come together. First, you need to have an ideology such as sacred scriptures that are regarded as being the Word of God, or other kinds of writings, speeches, commentaries from authorities that call for violence in the name of religion. That's the first thing you need. And Islam, Judaism, and Christianity have such an abundant supply of all of those things that I really don't think I even need to give examples this morning. The second thing that's required are people who believe that they possess the one and only true religion and who are willing to take those violent scriptures and commentaries literally as a roadmap, as a guide for how to behave in the world, for how to conduct themselves. The real enemy is religious fundamentalism in any form. It takes those two elements, violent scriptures and adherents who take them literally. Any group that believes that its scriptures are the literal words of God has the potential to use those scriptures to justify violence, oppression, and atrocities. There's nothing sacred about violent scriptures. Violent scriptures are a monument to human greed and depravity. They are a shallow and short-sighted attempt to justify what cannot be justified. We need to look at violent scriptures for what they are. They're a record of something that happened in history a long time ago. Those are not the same circumstances that we are in today. Violent scriptures are a record of human failure. They're a chronicle of human cruelty. We don't make excuses or try to justify it. We look at it and we say that kind of conduct is categorically unacceptable in this day and age. We reject it. And yet, it's a snapshot of human evolution, showing us a very low point on the spiral of evolution. And from that standpoint, they have some value because they provide this ugly picture of where we have been as a species, and the message is clear. Don't go back. Don't go there. Don't glorify it. Don't regard it as holy or the Word of God, and don't try to justify it. And above all, don't do what it says to do. So in Unity, we talk about something called holding the high watch, which means that we look at the negative events of the world from an evolutionary perspective. We hold on to a vision of the eventual shift in consciousness that leads from violence and literalism to peace and a more symbolic and metaphorical interpretation of all of those scriptures. And every culture and every religion has had to face its own demons of extremism, fundamentalism, and violence in the name of a God. And in the long run, the voices of reason, free thought, and progressive values win out. Our culture's been through it too. We can't just sit back and say, oh, well, yeah, we've never been through that. Yes, we have. When it comes to the Trinity of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, there's no such thing as a religion of peace. And it's all a question of degree and evolution. And the fact that Christians and Jews have, for the most part, given up the kind of institutionalized violence, the kind we see being promoted by Islamic extremist groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Taliban, Boko Haram, and others. Christians aren't completely off the hook, but it's a qualitative and a quantitative difference. So, how do we explain that difference? Well, Professor Philip Jenkins at Penn State University, he's an expert on the subject, and he has something to say about it. He notes this. He says, what happens in all religions as they grow and mature and expand, they go through a process of forgetting the original violence. And I call this a process of holy amnesia. They make the violence symbolic. Wiping out the enemy becomes wiping out one's own sins. And you do hear symbolic interpretations of the Quran being advanced in certain circles. And unfortunately, those people are often accused of blasphemy. And the penalty for blasphemy in countries that have blasphemy laws are criminal penalties and sometimes death. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a few moments. Islam needs to keep going through that process. And I think the events of this last week are going to be a catalyst, because I'm starting to hear people saying things like this. We need to rethink blasphemy laws. We need to rethink the way that we as a culture and a religion react to being offended, react to insults and things like that. And we need to remember that Islam is around 600 years younger than Christianity. So naturally, it's going to take longer. If everybody has to go through the same process, and they're 600 years younger than Christianity is, well, they're going through that phase just like other religions have already gone through. Think about Christianity during the Crusades, or the Inquisition, or the witch hunts. They make Al-Qaeda look benign in comparison with some of the things that were done in the name of that culture and religion. So it helps to keep things in perspective. There's approximately 1.2 billion Muslims in the world. Al-Qaeda, at its peak, had maybe 30,000 fighters. As a percentage of 1.2 billion, that's nothing. And this isn't about mathematical abstractions either. It doesn't take all that many people to cause chaos and terror. And the overt acts of terrorism, like we heard about in Paris this last week, are just the tip of the iceberg. Because there are still many Islamic countries that impose criminal penalties, sometimes even the death penalty, for giving up your Islamic faith. It's called apostasy, and in some countries you can be put to death for letting people know that you've given up your Islamic faith. You can be penalized, beaten, put to death for saying just about anything about the faith that the authorities disagree with. Those are the blasphemy laws, the heresy laws. No questioning, no criticism of religion will be tolerated. Shortly after the shootings in Paris, there was this organization called the Center for Inquiry. You may have heard of it. They were the one organization back when North Korea had its little snit over that silly movie. They were the one organization that immediately said, give us the rights to it. We will find a way to present this movie and make sure that people get to see it. Well, their response to the incident in Paris was this. They said that the notion that Islam or any religion must be protected from questioning is incompatible with fundamental human rights and can motivate extremists to engage in outrageous acts as confirmed by the attacks in Paris. It is human beings who deserve respect, and it is the right to free expression that must be protected. In Unity, I've heard it put this way, that we are soft on people. We respect people. And we look closely at ideas and we question them. So do you know where else there are blasphemy laws? Laws that make it a crime to offend a religion or religious believers? I just checked on this, and I don't know if it's changed here recently, but Austria, Denmark, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Malta, Poland have laws that criminalize offending religion. How can you offend religion? In fact, I would say that any God who can be offended or insulted isn't much of a God. If your religion is so flimsy and fragile that it has to be padded and protected from criticism and questions and even mockery at times, then maybe it's time to try something new. I recall when I was around 6 years old, that was when the Cold War was really heating up. And I was hearing about this Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain and learning all about it. And to my 6-year-old mind, and still to my adult mind, it doesn't make any sense. The Soviet Union, remember how they used to brag about how they were the best at everything? They claimed to have a superior political system and a superior way of life, and yet they needed a wall to keep people from leaving that superior way of life. and a metaphorical wall to keep new ideas out. And I remember thinking, boy, if you have to build a wall to keep people from leaving and find ways to keep out new ideas, there's something really wrong with that country. There's some really, really bad ideas going on there. You're not strong, you're weak. North Korea comes to mind. Their all-powerful dear leader feels so diminished and insulted by a second-rate movie comedy that they threaten violence if it was released. Well, the bit of good news that we can hang on to in all of this is that the organizations that gave us the Crusades, the Inquisition, witch hunts, the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain, the Gulag, and unfortunately I could go on and on and on. Well, what do they all have in common? They're gone. They're gone. What happened is they collapsed under the collective weight of their own oppression and their really, really bad ideas. That's an evolutionary principle. Bad ideas like that are a barrier to human thriving. Bad ideas are not adaptive. So from an evolutionary perspective, they do not endure. Thomas Berry, Catholic priest and scientist who specialized in cosmology, somebody that whose work I really admire, had a quote that really made an impression on me. He said that the universe has a violent as well as a harmonious aspect, but it is consistently creative in the larger arc of its development. So, our task, our challenge in the face of the events of this past week and the past few months is to pay attention and learn how to work within that consistently creative arc of the universe, to see that and to trust it. And that includes a commitment to free speech, free thought, and free expression. And the other challenge within that is to resist emotional and reactionary responses. The idea of repaying violence with violence. I said earlier that Islam is not a religion built on principles of peace. And yet, I believe that the evidence shows overwhelmingly that the vast majority of Muslim people are peaceful and do not condone violence, violent conquest, or terrorism. We can help them break free from the grip of fundamentalism and scriptural literalism by making sure they know that we are not condemning them. We're not painting them with a broad brush. They're the ones who are suffering the most at the hands of these deluded terrorists. People who use violent scriptures to feed their own ego-driven agendas of domination and control. So the voices of opposition are becoming louder. I have heard far more outrage and condemnation from Muslim groups and actual concrete suggestions this week than ever before. And they're not making excuses. They're calling for change and reform. A reformation of sorts is what is needed. The blasphemy laws are going to stand in the way for a while, but I think those are going to be questioned as well. And if you need some concrete evidence, and I think we all need a little bit of concrete evidence that this is happening, evidence of how it works, I've given you in your handout, in your bulletin, a reference to a website that's called Free Arabs, freearabs.com. I think I've mentioned it before. It's the voice of the younger generation. These are the younger generations of Arabs from all sorts of different nations, stretching from Egypt and all the way over North Africa and all sorts of other places. And this is how they describe themselves. This is that's their banner up there. They describe themselves as a group of free-minded bloggers, journalists, and activists. We are based in the Middle East, North Africa, and the rest of the world. Keen on perpetuating the democratic spirit of the Arab Spring, we confront both autocrats and extremists with audacious reporting and whistleblowing, daring opinion writing, and creative and edgy artwork. Those are some people I'd like to hang with. Here's the homepage from Friday. And you can see down there, there's a couple of the cartoons that caused all the problem. They're not afraid to put them on their website. And the caption down there where it says, we are all Charlie, it says, we are all Charlie because they lived by their commitment to freedom of speech. Charlie Hebdo's journalists and cartoonists were savagely murdered in Paris. Arab bloggers and commentators stand for them. That's what they're saying in no uncertain terms. So, if you're looking for voices from the Muslim world that support freedom of speech, free thought, and a liberation from sectarian extremist religion, this is a great place to go, to give you a little sense that there is some hope, and surprise, surprise, it's coming from the younger generation. That's a good thing. I'll close with something that our co-founder Charles Fillmore wrote many, many years ago in a little book he wrote called Atom Smashing Power of Mind. This is what he said. He said, we are now in the midst of a race transition in which we are taking a very pronounced upward swing in the development of the ideal man implanted in us from the beginning. A new concept of God, man, and the universe is upon us. We must recognize all this and go upward with the mighty urge for higher things. Will God take us up to an imaginary heaven in a chariot of fire? Or do we use our mind to lift ourselves heavenward? And of course, the race transition he's talking about is the human race. Nobody gets left behind. Nobody gets singled out. It is the entire human race. It's still happening. God and religion aren't going to do it for us. It's going to take the liberated mind of collective humanity that's committed to freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, to make that happen. And that is what I'm going to keep focusing on. See you next week.